Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, on Thanksgiving Day, there's an old-fashioned SEC rivalry, the Egg Bowl, with the Mississippi State Bulldogs traveling on the road at the Ole Miss Rebels. Who do I think is going to win this game? Let's break it down. Now, Mississippi State is 7-4 and 3-4 in the SEC to start this season, and Mike Leach has done a really good job at Mississippi State after coming over from Washington State as the head football coach. And Mississippi State had been struggling as a program a little bit, but now he's got them playing really good football in the toughest division in college football, the SEC West, and they're having a really good season this year. In this season, they beat Memphis in Week 1 49-23, and that was a good win because Memphis is a really decent American Conference team. Then they won at Arizona 39-17. That was a good win because Arizona is an improved Pac-12 team. But then they lost at LSU 31-16. Not a bad loss there. Obviously, LSU's having a really great season. And then they beat Bowling Green 45-14. That was a good win. Then they beat Texas A&M 42-24, and Texas A&M is really having a bad season, so good win for Mississippi State there. Then they beat Arkansas 40-17, and Arkansas is an improved SEC football team, even though this year they've had some struggles. It was still a good win for Mississippi State. Then they lost at Kentucky 27-17. This was a tough loss. Mississippi State probably could have won this game now, especially because Kentucky's really struggling, but Mississippi State still not a terrible result there. Then they lost at Alabama 30-6. Tough loss there because Alabama's still a really good team even though they have two losses. Then they beat Auburn in overtime 39-33. That was a good win because Auburn's still a decent team even though they're below 500 in the SEC. Then they lost to Georgia 45-19. That was a tough loss because Georgia's the best team in the country in most people's eyes, and they were trying to be competitive. They just couldn't get it done. Then they beat East Tennessee State 56-7. That was a good win because that was their tune-up game before playing their rivals in East Tennessee State. Is an FCS program, so that was definitely a good win for Mississippi State to beat them the way they did. Quarterback Will Rogers in the East Tennessee State game had 301 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's a great quarterback. Will Rogers is a guy that does exactly what Mike Leach wants him to do in the air raid offense. He can make all the throws, and he throws sometimes 40 and 50 and 60 times a game, and he's able to handle the load, and he's a great quarterback. Running back Jaquavius Marks at 58 yards and a touchdown. Solid running back for Mississippi State, even though they don't run the football much, but they have run the football better this year, even though Mike Leach still prefers the air raid offense. Wide receiver Justin Robinson, 62 yards and a touchdown, and wide receiver LaDaedrick Griffin at 53 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mississippi State has a plethora of receivers that can catch balls from Will Rogers, and they have a lot of great receivers. And on the defensive side of the ball, linebacker Jet Johnson at 2 tackles, and defensive end Javon Banks at 2 tackles for Mississippi State against East Tennessee State. And Mississippi State has good defensive players, and they have definitely improved on that side of the ball because a couple years ago their defense was really bad, but it's a lot better than it used to be. Now on the Ole Miss side, they're 8-3 and 4-3 in the SEC to start this season, and Lane Kiffin has done a great job at Ole Miss. He's really turned them around from one of the worst SEC programs. For a while, they've been consistently good at times in the past. I think Lane Kiffin has really risen the talent level at Ole Miss, and he's definitely gotten better players in at Ole Miss than they had in the past. And this season, they're having a really good season this year. They beat Troy 28-10 in Week 1, and that was a good win. Then they beat Central Arkansas 59-3. Then they won against Georgia Tech 42-0. And Ole Miss dominated all these teams. And then they beat Tulsa 35-27, and they kind of struggled a little bit against Tulsa, but still that was a good win. Then they beat Kentucky 22-19. This was a game that they almost lost, but they were able to hold on against Kentucky. Then they won at Vanderbilt 52-28. That was a good win. Then they beat Auburn 48-34, but then they finally lost their first game of the season at LSU 45-20. Not their best performance of the season, but Ole Miss is still having a really great season. Then they beat Texas A&M on the road 31-28, and that was a good one to squeak that road one out. Then they lost to Alabama 30-24. Not a bad loss. They were really competitive against a still top SEC program in Alabama this year. Then they lost at Arkansas 42-27, and that was a tough loss because Arkansas is not having as good of a season as they had last year. They're still a really solid team, but Ole Miss could not get the win on the road. And unfortunately for Ole Miss, they did not have a tune-up game before playing their rival Mississippi State, but I still think they're going to be ready to play. And in that Arkansas game, quarterback Jackson Dart at 240 yards, a touchdown, an interception, 44 rushing yards. He's a really good quarterback. He's maybe not has the ceiling of Matt Corral did last year of how good Ole Miss was, but he's still running the offense really well for Ole Miss. And I really think if Jackson Dart can improve, he might end up being a better quarterback than Matt Corral in the long run. Running back Quinshawn Judkins at 214 yards and a touchdown, and running back Zach Evans at 207 yards and a touchdown. He's the TCU transfer. Both running backs are fantastic for Ole Miss, and they have definitely helped Ole Miss be more of a two-dimensional offense versus last year when it was mostly Matt Corral running and they were throwing throwing everywhere. Their rushing attack is a lot better this year. Wide receiver Malik Heath at 140 yards and a touchdown. He's a great wide receiver for Jackson Dart to throw to. And on the defense side of the ball, safety Hasheem Young at 5 tackles. Linebacker Ashanti Listrunk at 3 tackles for Ole Miss against Arkansas. And Ole Miss's defense, like Mississippi State's, has improved from where it used to be. Their defense used to be not so good, but their defense is a lot better now. And Ole Miss is really good on both sides of the ball. So who do I think is going to win this game? This game is very interesting because it is the Egg Bowl. Both these teams are going to fight very hard in this game. Both teams are already bowl eligible, and both teams are really talented on both sides of the ball. This game is at Ole Miss, and that's going to help Lane Kiffin's team out because the home field advantage in the SEC is really important. It's going to be very tough for Mississippi State to go on the road at Ole Miss in this rivalry and win. But what does help Mississippi State is that they had basically a gimme game against East Tennessee State, whereas Ole Miss had a tough opponent at Arkansas last week. So I think that's going to help Mississippi State to basically have 2 weeks to prepare for Ole Miss. And Ole Miss had to have a tough game at Arkansas that they did lose. But I'm still going to go with Ole Miss to beat Mississippi State 31-28. I think the home field advantage is going to help. I think Ole Miss is going to be angry they lost that Arkansas game, and they're going to want to beat their rivals. And I think that Lane Kiffin is going to have his team ready on both sides of the ball. I think Mike Leach will as well. And I think Mississippi State does have the advantage of having a bye game basically last week, even though they played East Tennessee State. That was not a tough opponent. I think they're going to be really ready to play in this game. And both sides of the ball for Mississippi State is really talented as well. And even though Lane Kiffin is being rumored to be taking the Auburn head coaching job, I still think Lane Kiffin is going to have his team ready to go for this rivalry game against Mississippi State. And I still think the home field advantage is going to really help out Ole Miss as well. And I think Ole Miss is going to beat Mississippi State 31-28. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below whether you think Ole Miss or Mississippi State is going to win this game and why. And I will see you next time.